Thank you all again for joining today's webinar brought to you by the Tribal Law and Policy Institute. Today's webinar is titled Justice Reimagined, Healing Community and Improving Outcomes Through Joint Jurisdiction, and will be presented by Judge Korey Wahwassuck, TLPI consultant, retired judge from the 9th Judicial District of Itasca County, Minnesota, and a former judge of the Leech Lake Tribal Court. I will now turn it over to Judge Wahwassuck to introduce herself and get us started.
Bonjour, good morning. It's good to be with everyone here today. I wanted to introduce myself and say, Sibi Kwadnindakas, Kigos Natodem, Iguyan Gom Kashamnado, Iguyan Denwin Magnadak. I'm Sibi Kwat and I'm Fish Clan, and I just wanted to thank the one who made everything for bringing us all together here so we can talk about joint jurisdiction and better things in our respective jurisdictions. So the philosophy behind all of this is that when we work together, that we are able to achieve much more than when we're working on our own by bringing the tools of each system together. So what is joint jurisdiction? So joint jurisdiction is exercised when a tribal court judge and a state or a federal court judge come together to exercise their respective authority simultaneously, bringing together justice system partners and leveraging resources to promote healing and protect public safety. It can be exercised really anytime procedurally. It's a creative approach and it transforms foundational systems and structures. So what are some of the features, the main features of joint jurisdiction courts? Well, certainly judicial leadership is a key feature of this. We need strong leadership from judges, and they must be willing to collaborate, innovate, and commit to shared goals. There needs to be voluntary participation, and that's not just with the parties that are involved in the cases that we're presiding over, but with our courts, our agencies, individuals. They all need to choose to participate willingly, and that's important for fostering trust and cooperation. We also need to ensure in these joint jurisdiction courts that they share the characteristic of having shared visions and goals. The partners need to have a common understanding of the court's purpose, values, and desired outcomes. If everyone is not on the same page with things, then it is very difficult to get things started and to have a cohesive program. There needs to be collaborative planning and decision-making. It needs to be done jointly and right from the beginning with all stakeholders contributing, because when they have a role in designing the court and operating it, then there's going to be much more buy-in with them together. They also exhibit cultural competency and respect in these joint jurisdiction programs. They honor tribal sovereignty and integrate cultural values, traditions, and practices into the court practices and processes. They also have integrated services and resources. So the court needs to coordinate services across jurisdiction to address participants' needs holistically. And there's also, they share communication and information sharing as a characteristic. And that could be, it needs to be open and consistent communication. There needs to be data sharing. Those are all essential for coordination and accountability in these programs. They also share a feature of training and technical assistance. And there needs to be ongoing education and support to help build team capacity and sustain effective practices. I think this is especially important when we have folks that are coming in that may change in terms of our participants as well as our team members. And they also are evaluated and show sustainability. So the courts need to address outcomes, they need to adapt when needed, and they need to plan for long-term sustainability in each one of these programs. Joint jurisdiction courts also, they blend healing to wellness and problem-solving approaches. They're tailored to fit specific cultural and tribal and local court systems. They break down silos and improve communication and collaboration, and they result in improved outcomes and system changes. So let's talk a little bit about where we began with joint jurisdiction. So in Leech Lake, with the wellness courts with Cass and Itasca counties, were created in 2006 with Cass County and Leech Lake, and in 2007 with Cass County and Itasca County, with the goal of addressing the epidemic of alcohol-related crashes and deaths. These were the very first joint jurisdiction courts in the nation and serve both tribal members and non-Indians. They're multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency participation, And what a lot of people don't realize is that they operated on a handshake for over a year with the Cass County, the first program with Cass County and Itasca County, or excuse me, with Cass County and Leech Lake. We really, before we had formal agreements in place, we knew that this would work, and we really wanted to try to have a program that would really be able to build. And it was, our foundational documents were living documents. We really, as we started, these are our pictures of the very first flag installation where the Leech Lake tribal flag was installed in the Cass County District Court. And this was an acknowledgement that poverty and addiction and hopelessness, they don't know any jurisdictional boundaries. Our tribal members go back and forth between county lines. And so it's important to keep that in mind, that we all, that they don't stop at jurisdictional, at the borders of the reservation. I think it's important to get a little bit of background. So for those of you who are from other places besides Minnesota, so you know geographically where we're located here. And so in the black outline up above there is, that's an outline of the 9th Judicial District, which, as you can see, is almost the entire top half of the state of Minnesota that's covered in the 9th Judicial District. And so you can see where the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe is located here in precisely in the middle of the district, and Itasca County District Court and Cass County District Court. That kind of gives you an idea of the geography of where things are located. It's important to look at some of the statistics when we're talking about overrepresentation and why you would want to do a joint jurisdiction program such as Leech Lake has created, and other jurisdictions following as well. So Native Americans are overrepresented in the probation system in Minnesota, really at all parts, juvenile, adult, and also in the child protection systems as well. So the Native Americans comprise about 2% approximately of the population of the state of Minnesota, but Minnesota has more Native Americans that are on probation than any other state. And this chart breaks down things when we look about the representation. So about 25% of the arrests in northern Minnesota shows the people that are on felony probation with the Minnesota Department of Corrections, felony probation with the 9th Judicial District, as well as incarcerated youth in Minnesota. So as you can see, these statistics are quite stark when we compare the number of people that are on probation in Minnesota to the population in Minnesota of Native Americans. I think it's also important to keep in mind that to address these issues, that the state is taking a more proactive approach, and that there is funding that is being provided through the Department of Corrections for probation programs that the tribes have. Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe is in the process of developing its own probation program as well to help address some of these disparities. When we look back at why we started into these joint jurisdiction courts, it's important to take a look at the statistics for how things were on the reservation as well as in the surrounding counties. So when we started in Cass County, the county saw a 21% increase in felony DWIs between 2000 and 2005. And Cass County had the worst outcomes in the state for children. And this is from community health survey responses from 9th graders. And so at this time in Cass County was first for sexually active teens, second for out-of-home placement and attempted suicides, third for drinking and driving, third for children living in poverty. And these are from Kids Count data that are put together by the state. So the situation for our young folks in the area was not good as we started. In Itasca County, when we got started, looking back to about 2004, methamphetamine caused a 33% increase in jail costs. Moving into July of 2025, there were 94% of all people that were booked into the Itasca County Jail had methamphetamine in their system or was in their possession. Also, meth possession accounted for approximately 64% of felony drug charges. And then moving into 2005 to 2007, felony drug possession charge increased by 57%. And then in 2008, the county was added to the state's list of 13 deadliest counties. So you can see in Itasca County that there were a lot of issues with public safety, especially with substance abuse issue and possession. The Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe Tribal Court at this time was really in a process of building jurisdiction incrementally. The court was created in the late 1970s as a conservation court, and in 1980 added Indian Child Welfare Act ICWA cases. By 2006, the jurisdiction had expanded and the tribal court was handling a larger type of caseload. So his civil, traffic, conservation, housing, moved into the child protection arena and also handling truancies, minor consumptions, curfew violations. And we were able to accomplish all of this at Leech Lake through assistance from the Bureau of Justice Assistance Tribal Court Assistance Program as a grantee. In 2009 and 10, you can see that the codes were expanded again to include family law, probate, and tax. And at that time, the band did not have any criminal codes as the jurisdiction was building and the infrastructure was building incrementally. But we did have use of interactive video conferencing. I think we were way ahead of the game in terms of the Zoom world that a lot of us are in these days. So we were able to be linked to all of the other courts in the state of Minnesota as well as administrative agencies. We did have common goals between the Leech Lake Tribal Court as well as our justice partners in the counties around us. All of the oops, self ahead of there. All the systems wanted to reduce contact and they wanted to have fewer children in out-of-home placement, address drug and alcohol abuse, and reduce the number of DWIs and traffic fatalities. So there was a lot of area that we could work together because we were both trying to achieve those same goals in different ways. I like this quote from Leo Brisbois from White Earth. He's a federal magistrate judge and former president of the Minnesota State Bar Association. And Judge Brisbois said that execution of the joint powers agreements between the tribal court and state courts are an important example of how broader intergovernmental relations can begin to come full circle back to that of co-equal sovereigns. And I think that's really what we've seen is that the tribal court has been coming together with partner courts as equals in these programs. A lot of people wonder about the foundational documents, how we got started with things. And so we did start with a handshake with Leech Lake and Cass County in the beginning. But as other jurisdictions were interested in what we were doing and seeing that how it was so successful, we did develop a full set of foundational documents, which included our joint powers agreement between the tribal court and the state court. And by the way, this joint powers agreement is all of 52 words, 7 lines. There's a set of common goals that the courts have agreed to exercise jurisdiction simultaneously over. And these same joint powers agreements have been re-signed by the new judges as people have changed. As I said, I'm no longer on the bench there, and we've had some other judicial changes, but the joint powers agreements remain the same. There's also resolutions by the Tribal Council and County Boards of Commissioners for Cass and Itasca County in support of the programming. And one of the things that we did in our programming at Leech Lake, we didn't have any probation at the time to be able to make sure that there was compliance with the orders. So we were able to do a cross-appointment order with Cass County Probation to appoint them to serve as our probation in tribal court. And they were already working with a lot of these same people that were on probation, and we were working together under joint jurisdiction. And so we were able to then have probation services in tribal court, and it didn't cost the tribe anything. We also have memorandum of understanding for our wellness court team members and interagency agreements. That's one of the things that we tried to work on more internally, is to make sure that the tribal court was working together with Leech Lake Human Services and other places, the departments that we would be referring to. And so we did do interagency agreements to be able to make that possible. And then, of course, the documents for the program, such as participant contracts. Other agreements came from this. We had a joint powers agreement with the state for police services for wellness court. So for instance, if we had people that were living on the Leech Lake Reservation, we had an agreement that Leech Lake Tribal Police would do knock-in chats and do some compliance reviews for us as well. Another area that we were sort of lagging behind and not having the resources for was to have a guardian ad litem program or CASA program. And so we were able to springboard off of our other work to do a contract with the 9th Judicial District to provide guardian ad litem services in tribal court, which was a huge benefit to the tribal court. And I mentioned the ITV system that we had, and so we were able to use that to have incarcerated parents appear in tribal court by ITV for their child protection court hearings. And we also were able to do things like video visits, so we were able to make expansive use of that. Other agreements that came out of this work, we had a memorandum of agreement between Cass County and Leech Lake for our wellness court and juvenile restorative justice program. And as part of that agreement, the Leech Lake flags were presented to the Cass County Board of Commissioners and installed there as well. So we were working together on this juvenile programming that was expanding. There were regular joint meetings between the Leech Lake Tribal Council and boards of commissioners for Cass and Itasca County, and those have continued to today, and there's lots of other projects. And then again, the cross appointment of Cass County probation agents. This practice and the way we did this with joint jurisdiction is really recognized as a promising practice. And it demonstrates there's intergovernmental cooperation. It's a very innovative program. It can be, as you can see, as we'll talk about soon, it can be repeatable, replicable in other jurisdictions. It's also sustainable. All of the services are really grounded in culture and tradition of Leech Lake, which makes that a lot more effective. And also there's a unique operation, management, and effectiveness, which makes them a promising practice. They respect and enhance tribal authority. And there's fairness. It's a fair, non-discriminatory, and an impartial treatment of everyone that appears in the programs. It also became a national model of intergovernmental collaboration. The program received 9 awards and resolutions, including in 2010 the Joint Jurisdiction Program received a Harvard Honoring Nations Award and was recognized by the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, their Cultural Proficiency Courage Award in 2011, Criminal Justice Association Outstanding Tribal Criminal Justice Program in 2012. And then we also received a Local Government Innovation Award from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs and the Bush Foundation, recognizing the work. So really, a lot of other jurisdictions were able to learn from what Leech Lake did, and then they have taken that and modified that for their own jurisdiction. So 18 jurisdictions have really reimagined justice at this point, and they're handling a broad array of cases. In the civil arena, we're talking about adoption and child abuse and neglect cases, domestic violence, family law, all these different areas. And in criminal cases for adult felonies and misdemeanors and DWI cases. So it's really, as we said in the beginning, joint jurisdiction can be used for just about anything if 2 jurisdictions want to come together and it meets your local needs to help solve the problems that you're facing. The places where the model has been replicated, we have Leech Lake, of course, and White Earth, the White Earth Nation and Becker and Monoman counties are working together. St. Regis Mohawk is actually doing some international work. They have in the courts, local courts in New York, as well as some of their participants and tribal members that live across the border in Canada. The Kenaitze Indian tribe in Alaska and the Kenai, Alaska court system created a program. Hoopa tribe in the Humboldt County in California, Shingle Springs, Band-of-Miwok in El Dorado County, the Yurok tribe in Humboldt and Del Norte counties, Forest County, Potawatomi, and in Forest County, they've done some work as well. And then the Ho-Chunk Nation and Jackson County, Wisconsin have been doing some planning as well. So you may ask yourself, if you're wishing to do some joint jurisdiction work yourself, where do you start? So you need to ask yourself how are you going to heal the whole community? And what are some of the long-term benefits when you're really working together? What cost savings can there be across all the justice partners and systems? And are you already collaborating with agencies and across jurisdictions? And I think it's surprising to some people to really realize that they have more collaborations and things going on that they may realize that you can really build on those existing collaborations. So if you're interested in exploring how to do a joint jurisdiction court and following the footsteps of these prior jurisdictions, there's some steps that you can take, including having collaborative meetings, getting your community stakeholders together. And it's important that these meetings are convened by judges. I guess they say we have that power to convene people, and when judges ask people or tell people to show up, that they do. And so it's important, I think, in experience here that these meetings come from the judges to get that started. But again, as we talked about, that there needs to be that buy-in and the participation from everyone. It helps to have a neutral facilitator. And we have 3 or 4 on-site meetings for 2 to 3 consecutive days. That way you get people together. They're really honed in on what you're trying to do and create. And it does help to have someone that's a neutral facilitator to come in and guide that. And then that way it doesn't seem as if someone from one of the different partner agencies is really trying to push that, but really the neutral facilitator can come in and help everyone come together. There need to be ground rules to ensure that everyone has a voice in the planning process. And you need to identify stakeholder and expectations, their values that they have, and any feedback. I think it's really important going into this because, as we said, everyone needs to be on the same page about what you want to do, and also what they can bring to the table. So it really does help to know what people's expectations and what they know. So everyone starts from the same place. It helps to also map the current system. One of the things that we found in a lot of this work is that the systems don't necessarily understand how each works. And then even sometimes within our own system, the tribal system or the state system, not all those justice partners may really realize how things actually work. So it does help to start with mapping the current system. That helps to identify where you have service gaps and where there might be new opportunities to either create services or also to have new opportunities for collaboration. It also is important to infuse culture and incorporate best practices, and to create agreements in your program manual in terms of the steps to do this. I will say that in terms of infusing culture, the basics of joint jurisdiction and some of these things, each tribe is going to be different, but it's important to note that you can really modify how you run programming and what that culture looks like so that it works for you locally, and so that your own culture and ways can be incorporated into these best practices. When you're having collaborative meetings, there's a few keys that we have identified that will be helpful. The judges really need to be co-equal partners. They're very different systems, and so you want them to come to the table. It really sends an important message, not only to the participants, but also to all of your stakeholders, that the judges are coming together as co-equals, and that they're forging collaboration between governments, and that the face-to-face relationships are really necessary to create that mutual understanding, trust, and respect. Because if you don't meet with someone, then it's hard to really get to know them. And if you don't know them, it's hard to trust them. So really getting together is crucial to have these meetings. There also needs to be a safe and open and inclusive environment to share ideas, because you want to hear from everyone. I think that's so key, that because there may be something that as a judge, I thought, oh, this is a great idea. But then someone that's on the ground doing the actual work may have input to say, you know, that might not work, or we need to tweak that a little bit. But people need to feel safe and secure that they can speak up to share those ideas. And out of this, common goals will emerge, and that joint court, it really starts to take shape at that point. When you're mapping services, it's really important to not reinvent the wheel. And it's really key, because there may be services that are in existence that the state court maybe have access to, that the tribal court's unaware of, and vice versa. So you can really build on what's there and what you have in existence, but you need to know what it is. And so it's important to really build on what you have going already, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Also, to identify those service gaps, and if there are services that could be utilized more, and opportunities to make new services, especially when you're bringing all those tools together. And you should also spend some time and ask each other what you need from each other, so that you can make sure to infuse that cultural and incorporate best practices as well. And I like this last point a lot, because you really don't be afraid. I mean, I think that with some of this, it's trial and error, and don't be afraid to try something new. One thing that I heard a lot is, well, we tried that and that won't work here. But just because something didn't work at one time, you may have new partners at the table, and there may be new laws, or things may have changed. So it doesn't hurt to go back to revisit things that maybe you couldn't do before. But don't be afraid to try something new. So what are some of the keys to success? And so the needs assessment can really reveal your shared characteristics among joint courts. TLPI recently did a survey of all the existing joint jurisdiction courts, and found out it was a needs assessment for them to find out what were some of the same barriers and the aspects of those courts that they shared. And so as a result of this, of the needs assessment that TLPI did, we were able to identify some shared characteristics among these joint jurisdiction courts. Leadership is crucial in developing these courts. You really need to have strong leaders that are willing to encourage people to get to the table and push a little bit if you need that. And it's also important to note that each of these courts really blended the court and the worldview approaches. So they brought those things together. And they also address root causes of problems that face court participants. And so this really is something that the state court system hasn't been able to do, to really get under those root causes to promote healing. So all of these courts address those root causes. Each of the programs broke down silos and they improved collaboration between all of the system partners. And it's amazing how, and that's internally and within the tribes as well as with external justice partners. So they were really able to come together to break down those silos. They also were able to improve outcomes and change the systems in better ways. And they applied sustainability and quality control strategies. It's really something that you take a look at to make sure that you're doing and achieving the results that you want to achieve. And also that you're coming together to ensure that there's sustainability for the program going forward. Each one of the programs also took advantage of effective technical assistance. And I think that that is something that's really helpful, because there may be lessons that you can receive through technical assistance that might not be readily available just when you have your justice partners together. So that outside assistance can be really helpful. Judge Korey Wahwassuck from Mohawk, I love this. She said that we see a problem and we work on it both at the local level and on the forum. And it's these relationships that make creative breakthroughs like their program possible. It's important to start small, think big, and don't give up. And I think this is important. When we started with the first joint jurisdiction court, we picked one thing that we could work together on, to address DWI and that issue with alcohol. And so that's something we started with one thing, and that really grew into other areas when we realized that we could work together. And so that really blossomed. And also to not give up. I think that's really important, because there's good days and there's bad days, as with anything. So some of the lessons learned that came away from our needs assessment in terms of leadership: we need to have strong leaders at the table in terms of judges, but you want your planning team to do the creation, because people are going to support what they help create. And then they feel like they really have some buy-in to that. You need to look at the team's common goals and vision and really figure out what that is. I think, so many times we all have vision statements for things that we're trying to do. And if you look at those vision statements, sometimes everyone's sort of looking in different directions, and then they wonder why they can't come together to collaborate very well. But you want to really reinforce that and identify those common goals and visions. And stay focused on what you're trying to do. And I think that will help you also, if there's obstacles that come up along the way, to really stay focused on what you're trying to achieve, because usually you can figure out a workaround for something like that. And we need to make sure that you're amplifying voices to be inclusive and balanced. And so if you have someone that's a frontline social worker, their view is just as important as an attorney for the tribe or the judge. We really are all part of this as partners. Also, there's a step toward conflict as it's inevitable. So you need to realize that, and I like to look at areas of conflict as really opportunities for improvements or ways that you can work together. Sometimes you do have to agree to disagree, though, because that will help to build better decisions later. But there are some things that you can just agree to disagree on. And I think that you find that common ground even through that agreeing to disagree. But there does need to be a final decision maker if your team doesn't have consensus. And so that might be in your court, in working, the judge might make a final decision, whoever you are going to be, but someone needs to make that final decision if there's an impasse. And you also need to plan for transitions of leadership and staff and have that warm handoff. I think in so many programs that I'm aware of, you have people that leave sometimes, and then things just kind of fall apart after they're gone. And so if you plan for that, then that way everyone knows when they're coming in with the new leaders and new staff, things continue. Luckily, with our changes in judicial leadership and some of our team members, we were able to operate continuously since we began in 2006 without any stoppage of our programming, because we planned for the leadership and staff and had that warm handoff. Each one of these joint jurisdiction programs also has a blended approach. So your judges and your stakeholders, they draw from the knowledge that they have from promising practices. So it takes from healing to wellness courts as well as problem-solving courts. And it's a new way of delivering justice. It's grounded in each tribe's culture. So again, it might be a similar approach. And for instance, at Leech Lake, we have the Anishinaabe values, the seven grandfathers. And in Kenaitze, they have their values wheel. And so it's different, but you're able to deliver justice that's grounded in that tribe's culture. Every one of these programs is a little bit different. We always talk about it being on a spectrum for what they're going to handle. And so there's really, they're all unique. And what drives what they look like is what you need locally, which is great because you don't have to be exactly like every other program. And they're shaped by historical and present day impacts in individual regions. So it really looks at that historical impact because that does have an impact on the issues that people are facing there in the criminal justice system. There's cultural specific design, and that has to include your culture bearers, get tribal elders, healers, language instructors. Many programs use tribal language to describe phases or other parts of their program. So it's very important that you have your culture bearers and language folks involved. And so that way it's a check to make sure that you're following what needs to be followed to be culture specific. Also recognizing that culture is medicine. That's a best practice. We know that tradition and cultural, they're healing on a lot of levels, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And really, we know that connecting people with their culture, that's a protective factor. And it can build resiliency, not only for the individual and their family, but also the community. And it can improve outcomes through using that type of an approach. Each one of these programs also addresses those root causes. So when we're dealing with tribal communities or any community's issues, it's essential to determine the origin of the problem. In tribal communities, that means looking at the historical trauma of each tribe and then spending the time to link that present day behavioral issue to the trauma and to the learned behavior in each of the participants' families and lives. And I think that that's really important to look at those root causes because a lot of times when systems don't address the root causes, then that's where we have recidivism and people haven't really addressed the issues that they need to. Each one of the programs also broke down silos. And Judge Anna Moran in Kenai, in the Kenaitze, in the Hanu Wellness Court, I love this. She said that the Hanu Wellness Court is a prime example of how two entities with similar goals can blend their unique talents to solve a community problem. By working together, the courts have been able to provide a joint jurisdiction wellness court to all members of their community, both native and non-native. We've been able to blend the more formal organizational style of the state court with the more informal tribal court model, and all participants have been able to take advantage of services offered by both the Kenaitze Indian tribe and the state of Alaska. And I've always talked about this, like it's creating a safety net for folks. So you have all of the tools of the tribal court system, all of the tools that are available to the state court, and you're really blending those and coming together to create a safety net for your participants and the people that come through your program, as well as their families. And when we break down silos, it really does result in better outcomes and better results because there are resources, and we all know we're scrambling for resources these days, and it's a continual problem. But we're able to see what's available to each system and really leverage what is available and make new funding sources and services available. For instance, I gave the example of the Guardian Ad Litem program that we were able to get our guardians and also having probation to help and supervise some of our cases. Those were things that were previously not available to Leech Lake because we didn't have the funding, we didn't have the infrastructure, but then we were able to provide that. And one of the big goals when I started at Leech Lake was that the tribe wanted to really promote healing. But public safety it's a huge concern. And so you really can you can do both. You can be having a hand in healing and protecting public safety at the same time. We also really found that it eliminated that us versus them attitude. The relationships between Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe and especially Cass County were terrible going into this. There was a lot of animosity, had been a lot of litigation and things. And really this brought us together. And it wasn't a us versus them thing anymore. It was like, let's see what we can really do to address these issues. And we're able to strengthen services to families and really increase public trust and confidence. And one of the things that we found that when we got started with the joint jurisdiction was that it actually increased confidence in the Leech Lake Tribal Court by Leech Lake Tribal Court members. And so they had more confidence in their own tribal court system. And it also helped to have, for the other court systems, to have more trust in our processes. And there's benefits that come out of that in other ways. It also allowed Leech Lake to expand jurisdiction with the limited resources that we had. Also, these programs will lower recidivism and stop that revolving door of criminal justice in the juvenile justice systems. So how do things change? What are some of the improved outcomes and system changes? These programs, and especially at Leech Lake, we saw truancy cases go way down and a decrease in child welfare cases, leading to cost savings. And the participants were reunited with children, and families ended unhealthy relationships. They were able to get driver's licenses, jobs, complete their schooling. And I love this, that when I was the wellness court judge, I used to love to tally up all the days of documented sobriety that the participants had, because on any given court session, it would be in the tens of thousands of days of documented sobriety. And when we're talking about the types of outcomes and issues that we faced prior to having the joint jurisdiction programs, it's a huge change and it's a huge improvement. So some of the sustainability and quality control strategies that can be used, certainly rethinking and evaluation, we need to tell that story together and to memorialize your agreements and policies, strengthen your collaboration. And that's important to have regular joint leadership as well as community meetings, because you want to keep the community and your leadership advised of what's going on. Because again, the things that people understand and they're involved in, they tend to support, and they show, well, as I'd like to say, shout it from the rooftops. And so you always need to strengthen that collaboration. And it's important also to think about when you may have new people that join your teams, that we want to make sure that they're included and that you're strengthening that with them as well. And then things like the flag raisings really signal that co-equal partnership, that you are coming together as equals. So we went from similar challenges and we had to focus on common goals. So when we got started at Leech Lake and a lot of these other programs as well, they were focusing on things like reducing DWIs and traffic fatalities and addressing drug and alcohol misuse, disproportionate minority contact, the number of kids in out-of-home placement, and breaking that school to prison pipeline. So those are things that all systems are really trying to, the state court and tribal court systems, we all want these same goals. I like to look at it in terms of like a circle for the tribal courts and a square for state courts, and they're very different. The systems are different. They have common goals, and when you put those together and you look at them through the lens of common goals, you'll find a lot more areas that you're able to work together on. So what are some of the lessons learned then in terms of collaborative meetings and your wellness court teams? And again, this draws from all of the work that was done with the needs assessment as well as the experiences of these joint jurisdiction programs that are getting going. So it's so important to be patient and flexible and to be adaptable, because no matter how much planning you do, there will always be something that comes up that you didn't anticipate, or it doesn't happen as fast as you want it to or planned for. And so it's important to stay flexible. It's also really important to take time to listen. I was someplace one time and someone asked me, well, what went wrong with that meeting? I said, well, you asked a question and you didn't take time to listen to the answer. And I think that's really important, that we need to listen to each other about what needs to go into these in our collaborative meetings. And it's really important to infuse that culture and also incorporate best practices, because they work together for better outcomes. But the important thing to keep in mind, I think so crucial, is that local needs are going to determine what that service structure looks like and what the structure of the court looks like. Because what we did at Leech Lake is different than what they did at Kenaitze and Shingle Springs. And so really the local needs for each one of those determined what the courts looked like. And it was also help, again, to have a strong facilitator to help move things forward, and it can kind of help get past some of personality things if there tends to be that. It's not one person that's from either the state or the tribe that is sort of running things. And it's extremely important to keep in mind that change is really hard. And so our joint jurisdictional team members, they're helpers, and each one of them has their own histories of trauma. We need to acknowledge that. We need to own it. We need to work on it if we're going to come together. And I always like to say that systems don't collaborate. It's our people that collaborate, that we are the system. And so if we're trying to change the system, we need to change what we're doing in terms of relationships and how we come together with things. Because those personality issues can really make it difficult for the systems to come together if the people that run those systems aren't willing to come together to do something different. And focusing on why you've come together and focusing on those common goals is really crucial, because that will keep you kind of your roadmap. And so it's like we don't take a trip somewhere without trying to figure out where it is that we're trying to go. And when you're keeping those common goals in front of everyone, I think that that's so key to be able to stay on track. Because if you get off on a tangent, it's like, okay, well, this is what we're trying to achieve. And again, to go back and take a look at what is it, what's the desired change that you're trying to make with your participants. And so if you keep that in the focus about why you're working together, it's amazing how many obstacles that you'll be able to overcome by working together like that, and to keep that in mind. And it also really helps kind of to take some of the personality out of things, of us as team members, when we're focused on the goals of the program and why we've all come together. But it's, I want to say a little bit more too about our own histories of trauma and our own experiences, because so many of us get into this work, and that's what sometimes we do it because we may have had our own histories, and that we want to improve the system. We want things to get better, but that can make it can make things difficult when something may trigger us, and we just need to be really aware of that. And it's okay, because those are experiences that we bring, and we're able to come together and acknowledge that, own it, and work on it together. And I think that there's a lot of healing that comes from that as well. So what are some tips for success getting going? Again, you want to make sure that you're integrating culture and healing properties, and that's at every step of the way. In your planning, your development, and you implement, stay grounded in your culture and the healing properties, because isn't that what we're trying to do? We're trying to heal people, because that reduces recidivism. They're not going to get in trouble again. It's going to heal families. So you need to stay focused on the culture and healing. And also on the fact that local needs will really determine what the structure of your court looks like. And relationships, relationships, relationships. Because when we're collaborating between governments, it really starts with two people that share common goals. And so, that's really looking at what are the goals of your court, of your tribal government. What are some of the things that you want to achieve, and maybe taking a look at your partners and some of the things that they're trying to achieve, and find those areas of common goals where you can start to work together. And I think that sometimes it does have to be sort of a what's in it for me thing. I think when we've seen if there were partners that were kind of lagging coming to the table, or were a little bit hesitant, when we look at the things that they're trying to achieve, and look at that in terms of common goals of how we can help them achieve their goals better, as well as our own common goals to achieve those, people are going to be a lot more willing to come to the table if you really emphasize that collaboration and common goals. And these ground rules are really important for communication, things like wanting to make sure that there's a space for open dialogue and that people feel included. And sometimes with that communication, I think that you may have some uncomfortable moments. I think that everyone needs to be able to have that opportunity to say what they need to say, especially in the beginning. And if you have ground rules to govern that communication, be it kind of a talking circle type format or something like that, at least that way you can kind of clear the air and have rules for how you're going to communicate, and how the meetings and so forth will go forward. So that really gets to keeping the environment open, because again, you want everyone to feel like they can share ideas, and that their voice is important, because it takes all of us in these programs to do that. Be sure to map the system and look at ways that you can improve. And even if there's ways as you go forward, there's even ways that you can improve current practice if you have a joint jurisdiction program. But it's important to map that out so you know people how they're moving through both systems and how they can move together through a joint system. And you want to measure things because, especially, when we're looking at grant funding and things like that, what gets measured gets funded. And so it's really important to figure out what metrics you're going to use to measure your success and what you're going to track. And to do that right from the very beginning, because it's very difficult to go back and to recreate that if you haven't been tracking that from the beginning. So figure out what it is that you want to track and start to get those measures in place from the very beginning. And it's really important also to share success stories, and not just within the tribe or within the court system, but share success stories in the community. Because really, I think that this ties in also to sustainability, because I think that if it's a program that the community really values and they're aware of it, then there may be even things like incentives that you might have. If the movie theaters and other places around where you are, if they know something's happening, then they might want to give movie passes or something. And so if people know what you're doing and that's being successful, then that helps in the long run with building more success and being sustainable. Again, flexibility. I think that, no matter how much planning you do, something will be different than what you thought it would be. So it's important to stay flexible, and don't be afraid. You got to be able to try something new, or to try something that you may have tried in the past that didn't work, by working together to take a look to find out that those things that maybe you set to the side, to get them back out and circle back to see what you can do, or try something completely different. And then to be sure and plan for those transitions, because you will have people come and go. You will have judges that may leave. So it's important that, especially with new judges that come on, that they're familiar with the background of what you've done and why you're doing things the way they are, and that they're familiar with the model. So that can really help in planning those transitions. So how do you get started? And then a lot of these things, we don't have the luxury to have lots of money in the very beginning to get started with. And so there are state and federal grants that are out there. In terms of state grants, there's collaborative courts grants and through the Judicial Council. And then we also, there are federal grants that are available for the Office of Justice Programs and other federal agencies, such as Bureau of Justice Assistance and the SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. There's also funding through the Children's Bureau. And so I would really encourage too, I think that a lot of tribes, in my experience, will apply for CTAS or some of the other tribal specific programs. And feedback that I've heard from a lot of sources is that there's some of these other grants that are out there that aren't tribal specific, that tribes aren't necessarily applying for. And so I think really to explore some of those federal and state grants to get potential funding to get started is really important. Judge Petoskey from Grand Traverse, he's from Chief Judge at Pokagon Band, and I think that this really sums up a lot about how we can walk on common ground. With open minds, we can learn much from each other. The wisdom of collaboration becomes apparent as the common ground is uncovered and explored. And so again, if you just have your open mind and are able to kind of set aside things that may have happened before, or at least figure out a way to reconcile that so you can move forward, but figure out what you can learn from each other. Because again, like we talked about, building that support system or that safety net, and each one of the systems has its own set of tools, and we can learn from each other. There may be things that each system knows, and when we start to look at that common ground, you're going to find a lot more ways and areas that you can explore to work together. Like I said, with Leech Lake and Cass County, we picked one thing to start off with. And this grew into juvenile programming and other types of programming that continue today, that continue to be developed. Also, all because people were able to have an open mind and figure out ways that they could collaborate together by looking at that common ground. So in terms of resources, there's lots of things that are out there to help jurisdictions that are wanting to get started with things. And so there's a Promising Strategies publication that was put together that TLPI had in 2024. Judge Abenani and I did a publication for TLPI on intergovernmental collaborations. There's also the needs assessment that I referred to. We have that available. And then Judge Thorne and Suzanne Garcia from TLPI did a publication in 2019 called Crossing the Bridge. That's a great publication as well. And then in 2013, Carol Goldberg and Dwayne Champagne had promising strategies for tribal state relations and promising strategies in Public Law 280 states. So those are some of the resources that are out there. There's also a publication by the Center for Court Innovation on tribal and state courts, strategies for bridging the divide. And then we had 2 law review articles that were published about the Leech Lake programs. The New Face of Justice, Joint Tribal State Jurisdiction, was when we were brand new in 2008, and it talks about how the collaboration got started. There's a lot of information about tribal courts in there as well, and ways to collaborate. And then Building a Legacy of Hope in 2010 was really perspectives from people that were involved in the programming, our partners, on how things came together and how that was able to work. So those are some great resources that are available. So if you're interested in seeing the evaluations for the Leech Lake Joint Jurisdictional Wellness Courts, there was in 2014, the Leech Lake Cass County Wellness Court was evaluated. And in 2015, the Itasca Leech Lake program was evaluated. And both of these showed incredible success. There was money savings, there was less time that people were spent incarcerated, better outcomes for not only the participants, but their family members. So we did try to measure things right from the beginning, so we were able to capture that, which I think was really helpful to be able to have sustainability in the future, to show that things work. So we have about 7 minutes left here. And so let's see. I just wanted to.
We do have a question in the Q&A box, and I can read that out for you.
Okay, if you could, that would be great.
Okay, so this is a 2-part question. It says, it looks like many of the tribal courts that are making use of this model are in PL 280 jurisdictions. Is this also a model that has been utilized in non-PL 280 jurisdictions? And is there a reason why this model is being used in those jurisdictions in particular?
Sure. Well, I think in Public Law 280 states, and Minnesota is Public Law 280, and so that was, an area that we were able to come together. And I think especially in the Minnesota model, because Leech Lake didn't exercise it in criminal jurisdiction, everything was going through the state system because it's a Public Law 280 system on the criminal side of things. And so that made it was very ripe with sort of those overlapping jurisdictions in a Public Law 280 state to be able to come together to find areas to work together. But I think that also it certainly can work anywhere. I know that we, Northern Cheyenne and the federal court system actually were working on something, and that never, for various reasons, it didn't take off. But I will say that part of the reason was, I think that we, in the beginning, it was sort of that everyone didn't have that understanding, that basic understanding when they came together about what this was going to be and what their goals were, which made it pretty difficult. And so, but I do think, as we said in the very beginning, that it works well. Most of the jurisdictions are Public Law 280 states, but I think that it can work anywhere if you have common goals where you want to work together for better outcomes. So I don't think it's just is limited to Public Law 280 states.
Thank you, Corey. I don't see any other questions in either the Q&A box or the chat. So I think we could maybe go to the next slide.
Okay.
We have either information up here. So if you guys do think of some questions later, you can contact us at either of these, either the website or the emails that we've provided there also. And then if we could go to the very last slide.
Sure. And I wanted to give, before we end out here, and I'll get to the last slide here. And before we get to the evaluations, there's one thing, and for those of you that may be on the call that have heard me talk and heard me say this before, please bear with me here. But whenever I do these presentations, I always like to talk about some advice that my son gave me when he was 9. And this is when we were first getting started, and other jurisdictions were interested in what Leech Lake was doing and figuring out how they could collaborate together. And so I was at the dinner table with my son and my husband, and where that was kind of my son's time to talk with us and everything. So I was obsessing, trying to do a PowerPoint and get ready and all these things. And so my son said, "Mom, what's wrong? What are you so worried about?" And I said, "Well, these people, they don't know each other and they've never worked together. And so, it's complicated trying to figure out how to get them together. And he shook his head and he said, it's not that hard. He said, it's easy. He said, first of all, he said, tell them to be proud of who they are. Because it's true. I mean, we need to be proud of what we have as different systems. And there's a lot to be proud of there. And his second piece of advice was, he said tell them to open their minds. And I think we get so used to doing the same thing in the same way, even though it doesn't work. I think that was the definition of insanity, right? But we need to open our minds and to think about other ways and think outside of the box, as they say. So that was a great piece of advice. And then his third piece of advice was, he said, tell them to learn each other. And I said, don't you mean learn about someone or learn from them? And he said, no, I can learn about something or someone by watching TV or reading a book. He said, to learn somebody, you got to look them in the eye. And I thought that was so key, because it's true. Everything we're talking about is based on relationships as a foundation. And so it's important to have those meetings. You got to learn each other and understand that. And his last piece of advice that night was to tell them, he said, don't be afraid. And we really have goals that each of our systems are trying to achieve. And when we work together, there are so many areas when you start to look at that you can, and to not be afraid to do what you need to do to try new things, because there is healing there, and you really have an opportunity to change things and to be stronger together through joint jurisdiction. All right, now
Great.
evaluations.
Thank you so much for that. And we'll give everybody a few minutes to fill out your evaluations, but we want to just again say thank you all for attending today's webinar, again titled Justice Reimagined, Healing Community and Improving Outcomes Through Joint Jurisdiction. And again, thank you to Judge Wahwassuck for joining us today. The webinar recording will be posted on Walking on Common Ground, and the recording will also be sent out via our mailing list, and those links are in the chat for you also. And again, this webinar is a part of a series of monthly webinars to support the development and enhancement of tribal courts, tribal justice systems, and intergovernmental collaborations. These webinars are brought to you by the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, the National American Indian Court Judges Association, and the Tribal Judicial Institute, UND School of Law. The next webinar will be on Wednesday, September 24th, and is titled Criminal Sentencing, Understanding the Parole Process and the Impact on Tribal Justice Systems. And we will have the registration link available in the chat as well. And it will also be shared with attendees by email, along with today's webinar recording and materials. As a reminder, again, if you were not able to fill out the evaluation, we do have a QR code, and that will also be sent out in our mailings also. And again, thank you for joining today, and we will look forward to seeing you next month, or actually in a couple of weeks at our next webinar. Thank you.